Okay, so after saying there was little to no news going on in the England camp for quite some time, we still have had some news on our shores. Obviously, big news breaking today, which is quite nice to be able to react to it straight off the bat. The WSL will be expanding to 14 teams. Rach, what were your initial thoughts on that? I know that we were both involved in some discussions last week. We had a little catch up about it and what that kind of might look like. But yeah, I mean, super interesting that we're going to now see 2 teams from the Championship going up into the WSL, making sure, I suppose, that the bottleneck that we kind of saw being created around the top of the Championship last year, trying to ease off. This won't take effect until next season, so the 2026-27 season, which is super, super interesting. But Rach, do you think this is a long time coming? This feels like the right time to kind of look at ways to increase the top level.
Yeah, I think after all the leaks and the various narratives about what was going to happen and what might happen and what might get tried, and we've just ended up with what we all kind of thought was the best way to do things, which is expanding the league. I think, just for clarification, it's the start of the 26-27 season, so it will continue with the same round robin format where you play each other, automatic promotion and relegation, alongside the addition of a promotion relegation playoff. So in order to expand the WSL to 14 teams for the start of the 26-27 season, it was agreed that up to 3 teams would be promoted from WSL 2 Championship. So the top 2 teams will automatically be promoted, and then there'd be a playoff between the 12th place WSL team and the 3rd place WSL 2 team at the end of the 25-26 season. So that's the coming season. In order to get the league up to 14 teams quite quickly. So it's good to see that it's not going to be across a number of seasons, that we're not going to have an uneven number of teams for a while. Like, it's just going to be done in a kind of quick way in a single season, and then the WSL will be up to 14 teams, and then it will go back to top 2 teams would be promoted automatically. So there will be a relegation from the WSL, and then there'll be promotion from WSL 2, and there will still be a playoff from 13th and 2nd place, if I'm right. So there will still be a kind of playoff option as well each season. So yeah, it's exciting. It's kind of what we expected, and I'm glad that was the conclusion that was come to.
Yeah, definitely. I know, obviously, we were at kind of a little bit of a meeting last week with the WPLL, and they provided some really interesting sort of context, I suppose, behind why the decision was made, why they decided to do it in sort of a more staggered way, and sort of why this was the right time. And I think, a lot of the decision making obviously comes from looking at the international calendar and sort of seeing, how many available free weekends there actually are throughout the season. I think once you start to factor in the Champions League and the sort of the double headers, the FA Cups, the Subway League Cups, now the sort of the international tournaments that take place, there was only sort of so many available weekends that you could actually physically fit in having those additional fixtures, so that they have been, I suppose, a little bit sort of not sort of constrained by those, I suppose, but they've had to do it in a way that obviously fits around the rest of the international and tournament schedules. And I think also in terms of making sure that the WSL and the quality of the WSL isn't diluted too much. So from the sort of understanding they were providing was that, at the moment, currently the sort of WSL is probably the 2nd ranked in the world when you look at the sort of the quality within those leagues, the NWSL being the front runner at the moment. But I think obviously,
yeah, but then you got to define what the word quality is.
Yeah, 100%. And obviously that's very, very subjective. And obviously I think a lot of people would probably disagree and say that WSL has probably pipped the NWSL in that respect. But
oh God, let's not get into that debate.
I think it was also a case of, wanting teams to get into the WSL, but also making sure that, you weren't having teams that weren't ready or didn't have the quality of players enough behind them and had the infrastructure there ready to actually compete at the highest level, with the likes of your top 4s and your top 5 teams. And that we weren't seeing sort of, dead rubber games where you just knew that the score was going to be an absolute spanking. So I think, I can understand why this decision has come about now. And it will take time. I really welcome it. Yeah, for sure.
That's the main thing. That's what we need to remember.
It's a growing league, and I think, what I do really like is the fact that now there's sort of more to play for within the championship, and that, we're not seeing that same level of bottleneck where you've got teams that, 1 or 2 points apart the entire time and could easily make it into the WSL and would give the WSL teams a run for their money, but don't have the opportunity to do so more. So, I think it's a good move, and I feel like it's been done in a fairly measured way. The second piece of interesting commentary around the WSL in the past week. So we've had a bit of data come in, one telling us that attendances fell last season, and another saying that the revenue for the 2023-24 season was higher than ever. Obviously, Bristol City were relegated, which clearly didn't help, but there were other factors at play. I mean, Rach, just sort of anecdotally, I suppose, you've obviously gone to quite a few games, you've had your bum on seats, you've kind of seen, some of the big games play out, but even the likes of, your Arsenals, who were getting, 3 or 4 sellout crowds at the Emirates last year. We haven't seen a single sellout at the Emirates this year, which kind of felt like, that was naturally going to happen, but we never saw it unfold. Does it feel like one of those situations? You're always the calm, cool head. Give us some rational decisions behind this, and that we couldn't obviously stay at that level for the entire time, and every Arsenal game was never going to be a sellout. You're always going to have fixtures that people aren't going to want to go to, and this is just part and parcel of the growth of the game.
I think you've got it. First of all, I think I hate the attendance narrative. I think it's such a non-narrative sometimes, and so much is drawn from figures that's a bit unnecessary, in my opinion, in a growing game. The idea that every season we're going to continue to break records is a bit naive. We've just come off the back of a summer, and arguably the Olympics is not a major, big kind of watched football tournament. We didn't have a major tournament this summer, and we always see a peak in attendance figures after a major tournament. So we're comparing to 2022-23, where we had a Euros and a World Cup, and the Lionesses won and got to a final. So obviously there's going to be a big impact in that. This idea that the fact that revenue is growing is what you're wanting, right? If Arsenal they played more games at the Emirates this season. If they got an average 45,000 attendance across 10 games, but got 60,000 attendances last year, you know what I mean? There are reasons why it might drop a little bit, but we're always so picky about attendances. Only 75,000 turned up when you said it was going to be 80. As if that's bad. Do you know what I mean? I think what I've found interesting anecdotally is I've felt like clubs like West Ham, clubs like Brighton are starting to improve in terms of attendance figures, which I think is really important, because a lot of the time the Arsenal figures will skew the overall narrative. So if they drop a little bit, everything's considered dropping. But if you look down at this article in the BBC, Liverpool, Tottenham, Leicester, Brighton, West Ham, I think, have ever so slightly increased their average, and even Chelsea have increased their average. But they're the teams that everyone would say, well, oh yeah, great, you're getting 60,000 at Arsenal, but what about your Liverpools, your Tottenhams? Mm-hmm. And they are growing their attendances, which is really important. It takes time, and I think in the article, which kind of really irked me, was about Aston Villa and how their numbers dropped because they moved to Villa Park. So it says it does not look to have paid off, the idea of going to Villa Park, which I just think is so reductive, that to expect all of these changes in a single season is naive. It doesn't happen like that. Look at Blackburn, who said, well, we played at our main stadium and our attendances didn't increase. It's well, did you market it? Did you try and get people in? It takes more than just putting it at a main stadium. It takes time. Arsenal have taken years to grow the audiences to the numbers they have. So for me, this narrative isn't a big problem. I think there will be a spike again off the back of the Euros, particularly if England and Wales do well. I think that obviously England more so because of the success they've had in recent years. I think that will have an impact. But, you look at now, Arsenal have announced they're going to be playing every WSL game at the Emirates. That has taken a number of years for them to get to that point, because it takes time to grow it. So I'm not worried. It's not that big a deal for me.
Come on, mate. I can always rely on you to be the voice of reason. Absolutely love that. That's exactly the assurance I think that we all needed. And I think you mentioned there sort of how important it kind of feels that the Lionesses kind of have a good run at the Euros. Appreciate things are a little bit, up in the air at the moment. That's definitely not a guarantee. And even getting out the group stages could be an absolute challenge. But yeah, it does always feel like off the back of the Euros last year and the impacts that we saw that have on the domestic game and sort of, getting those higher attendances. And we saw like a new wave of people wanting to have the games at the main stadium after that, and it kind of felt like there was this real positive energy and drive. And I think it's obviously always important that you have a national team that does well, because that success naturally does filter out into not just the WSL, the Championship, and also the national leagues and lower below as well. And also in terms of sort of grassroots participation, girls seeing what they do on the international stage and just wanting to get involved in football, not even with the sort of sense of making it to elite level, but just wanting to get out there and try the sport for the first time. Or the kind of lost generation. We had so many players who were coming, back into the game from their 50s and their 60s, after, the impact of the ban, and sort of, having that inspiration from the Lionesses to, get back into the game. And I think it was after COVID as well. And so many people needed that kind of really jubilant moment. And I think, same time round, really, there's so much awful things going on in the world. I think a lovely run in the tournament and at least getting to the semi-finals obviously has a massive impact on everyone's general good mood and vibe anyway, as well as the women's football businesses that exist in the space. So yeah, it is really important the Lionesses have a good run, but that is by no means a guaranteed thing at all. We do have a really good question in from Leonie on Instagram that is very relevant to this discussion. They said, do either of you want to see a women's club world competition? Would it be good for the game?
Something I'd need to do a bit more research into, to be honest, because my automatic reaction is no. I don't want more football. And I think having seen that calendar and that recent meeting, you realise how congested the schedule is already. And the idea of adding more in just seems like a terrible idea. But as I said, I feel like I would need to research it more and look at it more from rather than just the loading side of things, but also the impact, the commercial impact, the opportunities to play different types of teams. I feel like I'd need to proper delve into that before I gave like a proper answer. But my automatic one is always a bit like, not more football.
Yeah, I think it's that. I think we've talked so much, I suppose, about the scheduling and sort of the impact that that's going to have, and player loading and health and safety, and also mental well-being for the players as well, sort of going into another tournament. We did see something super positive, I suppose, with the World Sevens. The general feel was that it was a great opportunity to see more players. The players were kind of afforded a little bit more of an opportunity to show their personalities, and it was kind of seen as a bit of a light-hearted, sort of funny but very competitive tournament that obviously, there was a lot to play for. So you did have that kind of, the tenacity and want. It wasn't a funny little run out. Yes, there were some funny moments, I suppose, in the tournament, but there was a lot to play for. But yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens. I suppose we've got a bit of a template with the Men's Club World Cup, and to kind of see like what the outcome is of that, because I know even from sort of speaking to the sort of the men's side of things, and they're not that fussed about the tournament. Doesn't seem to be that sort of I don't know, level of attention. You want to talk about attendances? Yeah, it doesn't seem like it's going too well at the moment. So I think let's maybe reassess the position after the conclusion of that tournament and see where we stand before we think about having the women's one in.